What I want to do for the next 20 minutes or so, if you can bear with me, is take all this and go, well, so what? You know, is this useful? Is there, well, I hope it's interesting, but how it applies to television, okay, and particular popular television. So I want to say, what is a slight digression, talk about the basic structural units of television, okay. So we start with either the single film or the very short film. We go into the mini-series, very short two-parter. We go into the mini-series, and then we go into the series itself, the story of the week structure, the fundamental primary colours of television structure. Singles, serials, and series. Okay, you'll be familiar with all of these. Everything we do is made up of variants of those. Obviously, a lot of stuff stays in the primary colours. The interesting areas in a lot of cases, as I think the slap proves, is where the colours overlap, where different things go on. But they're all worthy of analysis in their own right. But what I want to do to begin with is talk a little bit about series structure and how that works a little bit. So, Dragnet, 1951, the first ever television series based on a radio series. Before that, story of the week, police find villains, lock them up. That's it. Okay. There's the equivalent, pretty much the same idea, pretty much the same program. It's procedural, isn't it? So what if you made a list of all the drama series procedurals that have been successful? Okay. Now, we could spend all day doing this, and I don't want to do successful drama series. I'm not looking for good. I'm looking for insanely successful. So I made a list of loads of things. You will have to forgive me endlessly because they are, of course, largely British and American. I did do this. It's going to take ages to get through. Are these shows familiar with you, most of them? I'm assuming they are. I'm assuming largely because they're American. They're fairly universal. They all have pretty much the same shape, beginning, middle, and end, self-contained story. Obviously, some have elements of ongoing story as well, but the purest ones, going back to Star Trek, is absolutely story of the week. There is no ongoing storyline. In Australia, well, I did this with the group I'm working with Fremantle. This is the list they came up with. You feel free to disagree with, although they didn't come up with... Who remembers Barrier Reef? Is anybody in this room? This is appalling. I am the only person who's seen it, and I live 6,000 miles away. This is terrible. Barrier Reef ran for 39 episodes from 1969 to 1971, and it's really good. There you go. Anyway, so it's on YouTube, so feel free to watch it. These are the ones. I haven't seen all of these, so forgive me. Do all these feel familiar? All these feel like procedurals? Pretty much. There we go. I think there we go. Anybody got any they want to add? Any they've made? Police Rescue. Okay, very good, thank you. Is it? Oh. Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, it is there, yeah. Okay. But anyway, so Rescue Special Ops, was that the one? Yeah, oh, there we go. Okay, oh, we mustn't forget Skippy for all its stereotyping. It is obviously a very, very archetypal procedural show, and of course was insanely successful in its day as well. Insanely successful. Okay, so that's successful. So come back to that in a second. What if you made a list of all the drama series that have not been successful? Now, I started asking the people in the room I was with yesterday to do this, and then they all clammed up because they realised that there would be people here who probably made some of them. But, yeah, the truth is we've all made unsuccessful shows. Hopefully we've all made unsuccessful shows. It's how you learn. So I didn't draw a list. But what I think is interesting is to go back to the success. Loads of shows fail. But if you look at that list of shows that succeed, what is it that they all have in common? And can you learn anything from that? And I think you can. Okay. Where do you place your heart becomes one of the dominant questions of all. If you look at that list, it is very, very, very clear at the heart of each of those shows there is someone who you identify with totally and utterly and absolutely. Not in the shows you don't like personally, but how a huge swathe of people, from Captain Kirk to Ironside to Columbo to Chummy and Call the Midwife to Life on Mars, there is somebody who you want to become for an hour, isn't there? The central protagonist is you. So if the central protagonist isn't right, nothing else is going to work. It doesn't matter how brilliant the writing is. If the casting is wrong, you're dead as well. Everything fails. Okay, so that's the fundamental lesson. Apart from that, what do they all have in common? Self-contained story, very clear and renewable story engine, very rigorously police points of view. It never changes. I mean, the point of view can be different in each different series, but once a point of view is established in the show, it never changes. So in the English show The Bill, for 18 years, you only ever saw things from the police point of view, and the camera, when it met other people, was always behind the police's shoulder. And the minute they started tampering with that, the series started to go downhill. Fundamentally, they all have a one-day time scheme, okay? Although that's as much a product of economics, I think. They're mostly about something. You know, almost all of those shows are either zeitgeist shows that are about now. So in England, the big zeitgeist shows would have been shows like Only Fools and Horses or Minder. Friends is a more up-to-date version of the show that, oh my God, that's how we live. How did they know that we live like that? An awful lot of them are rose-tinted spectacle shows. It wasn't the world great just before now. So one or the other, they fall into that category. Almost all of them are fundamentally uplifting, because why would you go back to a world that told you that everything was terrible? Because all these things are about bringing an audience back as well. They're about, if you are the protagonist and the protagonist fails, do you want to identify with them? It's much harder. I'm not saying this is right, it's just observations. In every single one of that long list, the protagonist is successful, or if they're not, they are in the long run. Okay, so that's what we're on. Okay, sorry, I should have animated those. Simple one-line premise. Each of them is a clearly defined antagonist, defining sense of morality, empathy, imitable characters. So a trick we used to do on EastEnders all the time is what would Dickens do, and how would someone impersonate them? You know, is find the thing you imitate, shortcuts, etc. You know, but fundamentally, all those shows share the same things in common: is you want to be there. Okay, and all of them, there's no fundamental change. The precinct becomes important. The very first episode of ER is all about this hospital is amazing. It may be poor and run down in an inner city, but God, the people who work here are brilliant. And it's much better this than a private hospital across the road. The regulars make things better. The precinct is threatened always from without, never from within. And order is restored. Okay. So what you see there in all of those shows is you know, they've all got surrogate families, haven't they? They're all about surrogate families. There's very clear patriarchal and matriarchal structures, and all of them are fundamentally about this territory is good, it is being invaded from the outside, we will kill off those invaders and home will be returned to its peaceful state. Okay, so it's very conservative in its values, the series form, I think. Doesn't mean it can't be good, but it is very, very conservative. Okay, but most of all, what they all have is a clear format. And again, I'm sure you're very obvious. You know, main basic elements of formatting, you know, being narrative framing. So in Star Trek is obviously Captain's Log, Stardate, you know, beginning and end every week. Very clear sense of setup and payoff. And they contain endless motifs. So if you go far enough back to the Waltons, you know, from Goodnight John Boy to the two sisters and their drink and the light going off at the end and his diary at the beginning. Same elements every week. I mean, simplistic, immensely powerful in time. And what most of them have, which I discovered only when I went to America and worked there for a while, was the clearly defined act structure. It was all about act structure. They were fundamentally telling the same story every week. You know, and this wasn't necessarily the act structure they all followed, but it was one that became very popular on the English show Casualty. Is you had a master 5 acts, then you ran the B story that started when the first act of the A story was over, and same with the C story. That gave you a structure, and that structure never changed any week. It was always the same thing. Okay. So it's a world where everything is built on familiarity and repetition, endlessly. endlessly. It's repeats. It was shocking to realise that NYPD Blue was the same story every week, and exactly the same scene each week. It would cut to the outside scene. You know, it was like insanely formulaic. The skill being that if you do it well, you don't notice that. And with Star Trek, you don't notice because it's just when you're 12 years old, it's just lovely and fun, and it feels safe and warm. And what these shows tend to be doing is sort of replicating the early experiences of childhood, where mum and dad will protect you. I'm not saying that's what they do, but there seems to be a lot in common with that. The world is dangerous, but we will make it safe.